Mr. Mayor.
Good afternoon, sir.
We can't see you, sir.
Okay. Mark, are we ready to go? Mark Galvin?
Mr. Mayor, we can't see you, sir.
Ready to go, Mr. Mayor?
I can see myself.
I can see you. Oh.
Now we
If
can
everyone else
see
put
you,
their
sir.
cameras
How's it
off at
going?
the moment, please, that'd be great.
I don't think they heard you, Mark.
Oh, turn off.
Yeah,
Right.
there we are. We just got Altaf now. Okay, well, I'm going to start, but I can still see Altaf. Can I welcome all members and officers to the meeting of Council, which, due to government advice to practice social distancing, this meeting will be held virtually. The meeting is being recorded and will be available via the Council's website to be viewed as soon as practicable following the meeting. Everyone participating in the meeting will be accessing this meeting from remote locations. Please could everybody ensure that mobile phones are switched off or to silent mode, please. Members will have received an electronic copy of the agenda. I will ask officers to present a summary of the key points. For the record, the agenda can be viewed on the Council's website. Members and officers will be speaking at various points during the meeting, and those speaking may switch their cameras on at that point. But I would ask that, with the exception of myself as Mayor, and at all other times, you keep your cameras and microphones switched off, as this will help to minimise any background noise and interference, and to ensure the connection remains as stable as possible. If any members or officers wish to speak, they should use the hands up icon on the screen, and I will come to you in the order I receive the request. Please do not use your microphone until I invite you to do so. Please lower your hand once you have finished speaking. Also, the chat function will be disabled, as on Teams we cannot clear any text on the recording. Under the Budget and Policy Framework rules, any proposed amendments to the proposals today must have been submitted 3 working days before the budget meeting. As no proposed amendments have been received, I am unable to accept any amendments tabled today. In the event that the Council requires to vote on any item of business before it at the meeting, the Senior Democratic Services Officer, Mark, will call out the names of each member present in turn and request them to vote verbally, either for, against, or abstain. I will then ask the Democratic Services Officer to announce the result of the vote and Council's decision on the item, with reference to item 7, at the end of which I am assuming there will be a vote. I will call a 5-minute break for that vote to be counted and for members to have a break. Members will recall it was agreed at the AGM and other council meetings that votes will be treated as recorded. So this prevents the need for a recorded vote on whether to have a recorded vote. This obviously saves a great deal of time and for the Democratic Services officers. Officers from Democratic Services and ICT will be supporting the meeting and will be monitoring the use of microphones throughout, and where necessary will mute those not being used. Because we have a long agenda and it's likely to be a long meeting, when members indicate they wish to speak, obviously put the hand up and I will allow that person to speak, and I will allow 1 supplementary from that same person. What I'm hoping to achieve is that people don't keep coming back and asking more and more questions for clarification. That we have the one primary point and then a secondary point, and that is it, to allow others time to put their questions. Before we formally commence, I will now ask the officer from Democratic Services to announce the names of the councillors in attendance at this meeting. I would ask the officers to introduce themselves as and when I invite them to speak during the course of the meeting. They too should ensure microphones and cameras are switched off when not in use. Mark. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Members today are Councillor Tilsley, Jefferson Tilsley, Councillor Alex Williams, Councillor Altaf Hussain, Councillor Amanda Williams, Councillor Eniel Pachella, Councillor Brian Jones, Councillor Bridie Sedgbeer, Councillor Caroline Webster, Councillor Charles Smith, Councillor Cheryl Green, Councillor Keith Edwards, Councillor David White, Councillor Dinisha Patel, Councillor Lane Venables, Councillor Gareth Howells, Councillor Gary Thomas, Councillor Hugh David, Councillor Howell Williams, Councillor James Radcliffe, Councillor Jane Gebby, Councillor John McCarthy, Councillor John Spanswick, Councillor John Paul Blundell, Councillor Julia Williams, Councillor Kay Rowlands, Councillor Kenneth Watts, Mayor and Chair, Councillor Lynn Walters, Councillor Matthew Voisey, Councillor Mike Clark, Councillor Mike Kern, Councillor Nicole Burnett, Councillor Nora Clark, Councillor Pam Davis, Councillor Paul Davis, Councillor Philip White, Councillor Richard Collins, Councillor Richard Granville, Councillor Richard Young, Councillor Malcolm James, Councillor Rod Shaw, Councillor Ross Sturman, Councillor Sadie Vidal, Councillor Sean Aspey, Councillor Sorrel Dendy, Councillor Stephen Smith, Councillor Stuart Baldwin, Councillor Tom Beadle. Just going down the remainder. Mr. Mayor, Councillor Ross Thomas, Councillor Tim Thomas, and Councillor Tom Gifford. I think that's it, Mayor. Thank you.
Thank you, Mark. I have Councillor Janice Lewis indicating to speak. Janice, please.
Yes, thank you, Mayor. I seem to be missed off the list there. Thank you, Mark. And also, could I just say that Councillor David Lewis will be late in joining us. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Lewis. You get that, Mark?
Yes, Mr. Mayor. Apologies for that.
Okay. Well, we're moving on then to item 2. Any declarations of interest, please? No. Okay, I have nobody indicating here. So moving on to item 3, approval of the minutes of the council held on the 20th of January 21. Can I have a mover and a seconder, please?
Move.
I'll
Second.
second that, Mr. Mayor.
Okay. Thank you very much. All in favour?
Yes.
Aye.
I'll take silence as thank you very much. Moving swiftly on to item 4, my announcement. Good afternoon. I hope that you are all keeping safe and well, and seeing as I think you're all here, that's pretty obvious. For obvious reasons, I've not been able to physically attend any events, but I was honoured to record a message and light the candle of remembrance of part of Bridgends Council's annual Holocaust Memorial Day, which this year was virtual. As you are aware, Holocaust Memorial Day takes place on the 27th of January each year, a date that honours the day in 1945 that Allied forces took over Auschwitz-Birkenau and freed the prisoners. It is also a day to remember the millions of people murdered during the Holocaust under Nazi persecution and in the genocides which followed in Cambodia, Rwanda, Bosnia and Darfur. And it reminds us to be ever vigilant against persecution and discrimination in any form. I did also attend virtually a memorial evening for Srebrenica, which was broadcast by the Muslim group and church in Cardiff, and it was very interesting. They had 2 speakers who were in Srebrenica during the Troubles, and it was certainly an eye-opener. And it shows that I do wonder if we ever learn from history. But there we are. I was pleased I attended. Okay, thank you for that, everybody. Cabinet members and announcements. Deputy Leader, Councillor Howell Williams, please.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'm not sure if we're doing official announcements, but I do have some news that I am able to share very quickly, and that's around the garden waste collection scheme. There is a special offer for 100 free subscriptions if you sign up before the 1st of March. and I'm very pleased to let you know that we've already had around 3,125 homes have signed up for this service. So,
Excellent.
so if you're interested in the garden collection, please get your name in the box.
Okay. Is that, yes, it is official announcement, Councillor Williams. Is that it for you?
Yes, that'll do. Thank you.
Okay. Cabinet Member Communities, Councillor Richard Young, please. Councillor Young?
I'm here.
Oh, good.
Yeah, I'm not. I wasn't aware that we were making announcements at this meeting. I think it's unusual that.
Right, I've got it on my list here. So if
Yeah, I know it's on the list. I was surprised when I saw it, but it's unusual to have it on the list for the budget meeting, Mr. Mayor. So on that basis, I would like to say that at the moment I have no announcements because I would prefer it to go forward towards the business of the day.
Okay, thank you very much, Councillor. Can I assume then from the other cabinet members that they too have no announcements to make? Councillor Burnett?
I have no announcements, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. Councillor Smith?
Only to say, Mr. Mayor, that I have joined the garden waste scheme. Thank you.
Very good. Okay, and Councillor Patel?
No, nothing from me. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. Thank you all. Okay, we move on to item 5 then, to receive the announcement of the leader. But does the leader have one?
Yes,
Right.
yes, I do, Mr. Mayor. 1 out of 6 is not bad, is it? Thank you.
No, not bad. I didn't think I'd be able to suppress you, Hugh.
No, unfortunately, you're going to have a report off me. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Right.
More than 126,300 vaccinations have now been carried out across the Cwmtaf Morgannwg University Health Board region. For Bridgend County Borough, this breaks down as more than 37,300 people who've received at least 1 dose of the vaccine. As members know, the priority groupings for the vaccination programme have been determined on a UK-wide basis by the Joint Committee for Vaccination and Immunisation. An announcement has been made about that today, and once we have received more details on that, I'll make sure that those details are shared with members. If anyone has constituents within the first 4 priority groups who are concerned that they've not received an appointment for their first dose, they can call a special hotline 01443 562 264 or fill in an online form at the Cwmtaf website. Otherwise, with vaccinations for people in priority groups 1 to 4 now complete, the focus has turned towards the 120,000 people who are within priority groups 5 to 9. Colleagues in Cwmtaf believe that they are on track for completing this new phase and delivering at least the first dose of the vaccination to these groups by the end of April. Council is continuing to work very closely with the Health Board and is supporting the rollout of the vaccine here in Bridgend. For example, we have provided Ravenscourt as a centre for the community immunisation centre, and we've also worked with the Health Board to secure the location in my stake for the 2nd community vaccination centre. As an authority, we are leading on a new lateral flow testing initiative, also known as community testing, in a number of our local areas. This is a 4-week Welsh Government initiative where a testing team targets different communities and carry out tests on residents aged 11 and over were not displaying any symptoms of coronavirus. The aim is to identify asymptomatic individuals who may not be aware that they are infected. It involves the setting up of centres where people can attend and carry out a test themselves, which is then processed on the premises. The participant receives the result by text or email within about 30 minutes of completing it. If it is positive, arrangements are made for the participant to receive a second confirmatory test. In Bridgend, the lateral flow testing will focus on Caira, Mtfs Pile, Cemfigil, Cynelli, Cefn Crwbw, Sarn, Abercemfig, and Isawdra, Bryncethin, Bryncoch, Hendra, Felindra, and Penprysg. While these areas have been selected based mainly on public health surveillance data, the testing programme has been designed to be able to react in the event that hotspots develop during the programme. Extensive preparation is currently taking place to organise and promote the lateral flow testing. And I know that members will want to join us in making people aware and encouraging their participation in this initiative. With the programme set to begin very soon, Welsh Government are expected to confirm further details shortly, and I will of course ensure that members are kept fully informed. Lateral flow testing will also be taking place within local schools and the bridge alternative provision, again in line with Welsh Government requirements. This will seek to prevent the likelihood of clusters and outbreaks and the disruption to education and care that inevitably follows. Throughout each of the vaccination, mobile testing and community testing initiatives, I'm afraid that residents will need to continue to remain alert for criminal scammers who may try and trick people into handing over cash and confidential information. I would ask members to remind their constituents that the vaccine is free to receive. The NHS will never ask for a payment, and they will not turn up at your home unannounced or ask you to hand over confidential documents or banking details. As before, the advice on keeping Wales safe remains the same. Remember to keep a 2-metre distance from others, wash hands regularly, and wear face covering where required. Whilst the number of cases continues to decline, it is important to remember that 38 people are currently recovering from coronavirus at the Princess of Wales Hospital. Latest figures from the Health Board confirm that 16 residents are still battling the virus there, 3 of whom are in intensive care. So it is imperative that we do not let our guard down. Mobile testing facilities remain fully available in the borough for anyone who's experiencing symptoms of coronavirus. And further details of these can be found at the Council, Cwmtaf and Welsh Government websites. Finally, we are of course approaching the 1-year anniversary of the start of the pandemic. A national project is underway to mark this event on the 23rd of March in order to enable people to pay respect to all those who've lost their lives as a result of the pandemic. The project involves lighting up iconic structures and community buildings, and Bridgend County Borough will be taking part in this. I will of course bring you further details as soon as they have been confirmed. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Yeah, thank you, Leader. Before I ask Councillor Tim Thomas to come in, as he indicated he wished to speak, Mark, can I confirm or not that I asked for apologies for absence?
Yeah, sorry, Mr. Mayor, I lost transmission on my broadband. I didn't have any apologies for absence.
No, okay, thank you. Okay, Councillor Tim Thomas, you wish to speak?
Yeah, thanks, Mr. Mayor. Not so much a question, more a request. I just think that the telephone number that the leader outlined is just really important and quite critical. I didn't get an opportunity to note it down, and perhaps a couple of other members didn't get the opportunity. Just wondered if that could be emailed to us immediately. And I'd also like clarification on the opening times of that telephone line. Is it a 24-hour one, or is it? And what's the rate of the telephone call as well? Because that is important to some members of the public.
Yes, thank you, Councillor Thomas. Leader?
The details, the telephone number's already been shared with all members of the authority at least once, but I'll make sure those details are shared again. The telephone number is, I believe, a local rate, but I will double check that. It is not a premium rate number, but that's a reasonable question, and we'll come back on that. But as I said, the telephone number's already been shared with members. I've shared it through one of my emails. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Leader. I think I've detected that Councillor David Lewis has now joined us. Is that correct?
Yeah, yes. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Do you have any declarations of interest, Councillor Lewis?
No, none whatsoever.
Thank you. Okay, we now move on to item 6, the report of the Chief Executive. Mark Shepherd, please. The corporate plan.
Mr. Mayor, I think I'm going to take...
Yeah, Mr. Mayor, if I may, I'm going to pass to Jill Lewis to present this. Thank you. Okay,
thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And for the purposes of the recording, it's Jill Lewis, Interim Chief Officer, Finance, Performance and Change. The report you have in front of you today is the corporate plan, and the purpose of today is to seek Council's approval of the Council's corporate plan for 2018 to 23, reviewed for 21-22. And the corporate plan itself is set out at Appendix A. So the corporate plan 2018-23 describes the Council's vision for Bridgend County Borough, our 3 wellbeing objectives and our organisational values and principles that underpin how we'll work to deliver our priorities. We'll continue to be ambitious in our plans for the future and our vision of one council working together to improve lives, and that remains more than ever an important focus for us all. Our 3 wellbeing objectives continue to be relevant to the work that we do and what we want to achieve. So just to remind Council, the 3 wellbeing objectives are supporting a successful, sustainable economy, helping people and communities to be more healthy and resilient, and a smarter use of resources. And these underpin everything that we do and are closely linked to the financial reports that you'll receive this afternoon. The plan also represents our contribution to achieving the 7 national wellbeing goals as set out in the Wellbeing of Future Generations Wales Act, and also our improvement objectives under the local government measure. So I think it's fair to say that corporate planning in the middle of a global pandemic has never been more difficult, or you could argue never more important. It's been written at a time of great uncertainty and change, and the outcome of the recent consultation, Fit for the Future, has helped us to shape where we should concentrate our efforts going forward. We know that people have valued having access to community facilities, including parks, being outdoors, and that they're concerned about the economy and the impact on business and employment. And we recognise the lasting impact this will have on the well-being of children and young people and their education, as well as the mental well-being of all our residents. There are also concerns about the impact of COVID-19 on some of our most deprived communities, those most vulnerable in our society, including our elderly and on the BAME community. We'll work and we'll continue to be ambitious in our plans for the future and our vision of one council working together. So the corporate plan itself has been refreshed for 21-22 following a corporate planning process with corporate directors, heads of service through each directorate departmental management team. The process has been carried out between October and December to review progress, streamline the plan and to focus on reviewing commitments and indicators and to further maximise our contribution to the national wellbeing goals. Council will be aware that as part of the work undertaken to develop the Council's approach to recovery planning from COVID-19, a cross-party recovery panel was set up with the aim of shaping, informing and advising Cabinet on the Council's recovery planning. And the recommendations from that panel have been used to inform the review of the refreshed corporate plan for 21-22. So the wellbeing objectives, aims and strategic priorities remain unchanged. Commitments have been revised and performance indicators to measure outcomes have been agreed. Where possible, proposed targets have been set, and I'll come back to that, Mr. Mayor, in a minute. So there are two key issues that I'd like to draw Council's attention to this afternoon, the targets and the timeline of the plan. If I start with targets, and I'm sure Council will understand, many targets that were set for 2021 have become really meaningless and cannot be collected in the way anticipated due to the ongoing impact of COVID-19. For example, lockdowns impacting on schools, the local economy and certainly the footfall of our town centres. That's meant that setting realistic performance indicators for 21-22 has become more difficult and specific targets even more so. So within the plan, some targets have been removed, and in those cases we've reverted to measuring and establishing a new baseline. The second issue that I'd like to draw attention to is the timeline. And so as part of the annual review, it's also proposed to extend the lifespan of the current corporate plan by 1 year to 2023. And the rationale for that is twofold. The local elections have been pushed back by a year. They were expected to take place in May 21, but are now being held in 2022. That enables any new administration to set the new corporate plan post-election and ties the corporate plan into the 5-year cycle in line with the local election cycle. And secondly, public service boards are required to undertake an assessment of wellbeing 12 months prior to the local elections. And this assessment and page 34 of the next Future Trends report to be published in 21-22 should be used to help inform a new corporate plan. So the Corporate Overview and Scrutiny Committee have scrutinised the plan, and recommendations incorporated into the document are before you today. This committee will continue to monitor progress against the plan through the corporate performance assessment process. So the detailed plan is attached at Appendix A for approval, and I take you to the recommendations at 9.1. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Yes, thank you, Jill. Can I have a mover for the report, please?
Move.
And a second? Can I have a seconder?
Second.
Thank you. Okay, I have two speakers. Councillor Charles Smith, please.
Thank you, Mayor. I'd like to thank Jill for that presentation. I certainly support the recommendations. As Cabinet Member for Education and Regeneration, I'd like to reflect very briefly on the year that's passed and to underline Jill's statement that performance indicators and targets set became completely irrelevant. In fact, they can never accurately reflect the work done by our education service and, in fact, services right across the council, because challenges were set not on a weekly basis but on a daily basis, and in the early stages of the first lockdown on an almost hourly basis. And I think that all our colleagues responded magnificently. I'd like to pay particular tribute to our education officers, school leaders, teachers, support staff, parents, governors, and the students themselves. My heart goes out to the younger generation. I think they're having a particularly difficult time at the moment, whether they're in school or whether they're in their early 20s in university or seeking work in jobs that are disappearing from the high street, which would normally give young ones an entry into the world of employment. So I think we need to bear in mind that performance indicators and targets are fine, but sometimes they don't do justice to our essential service workers. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Smith. Next speaker, please, is Councillor John Paul Blundell.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Once I get myself all sorted now on camera. Thank you. First off, I'd like to thank all the officers for putting this report together and for Jill for giving the verbal report today. I think it's a very good report. Arguably, this is one of our most, if not the most important corporate plan this council has ever published with the ongoing pandemic. Could the cabinet members outline how this corporate plan will make us a more robust and strengthen us as a council coming out of the pandemic and for the future? Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor. I don't know who wishes to respond to that. Maybe the leader.
I thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'm sure individual cabinet members will want to come in, but the plan has reflected some of the dramatic and far-reaching changes that we've seen across society over the last 12 months. So there's specific reference in the plan, for example, to how we've supported homeless people who were sleeping rough. So we've provided temporary accommodation for all of those people. We delivered that overnight virtually at the start of the pandemic and continued to do so. And we've now, with support from Welsh Government and working very closely with the third sector organisations that provide much of the frontline support, we're looking to make sure that we keep those homeless people off the streets and actually help them rebuild their lives and move on from temporary accommodation to more permanent accommodation. So that's one of the ways that the plan has been changed to reflect that, because significant funding has been made available by Welsh Government for that. And I wanted to also take the opportunity, as I now have the microphone, Mr. Mayor, just to thank members of the Overview and Scrutiny Committee. Once again, I have thanked them in a cabinet meeting for the constructive way they've engaged in the development of this plan. So this is not the first time that backbench members have seen the plan. They obviously had a very important role in helping to shape it, and we have taken on board, as the chief officer said, we've taken on board their recommendations within the plan. So this is a plan for the Howell Authority. It is a plan that's been developed by the Howell Authority, and the reason why we are, of course, considering it today is because of the importance of the plan, as Councillor Blundell has alluded to, but also because it is critical that it is considered alongside the medium-term financial strategy, because this underpins the medium-term financial strategy, and the medium-term financial strategy underpins the corporate plan, because it is about how we prioritise resources within the borough. So thank you for that, Mr. Mayor, Councillor Blundell.
Thank you, Leader. I'll call on Councillor Richard Young as the Cabinet Member next to speak, and then I'll come back to Councillor Voisey after that. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Yeah, it's a very good question, and it leads nicely into what I was going to say anyway, in support of what Councillor Charles Smith was saying. Certainly within this plan, we are outlining what it is that we intend to do with regard to helping tourism and business within the County Borough of Bridgend. A lot of work is being carried out and has been outlined within this report with regards to the replacement development plan, for instance, which will outline where our development control will be and how we will control where developments can take place, and indeed target that development better for the citizens of Bridgend. It has outlined our continued support, for instance, for the Cardiff City region, which is targeted and tasked over the next 15 years to create 25,000 jobs and bring in £4 billion of private sector investment. And that is something that Bridgend County Borough Council can ill afford not to be part of. It outlines our objective towards tourism and business and how we will support tourism and business within the county borough, alongside things such as the Valleys Regional Park Programme, which is attracting £6.6 million. And also we have some heritage and some business-driven prestigious programmes being undertaken, such as the Mtfs Town Hall project, the Porthcawl Regeneration project, and let's not forget the Bridgend Master Plan, which is hoped within the future, within living future, obviously, will reconfigure the Bridgend Town Centre economy. And let's not forget our involvement in the 2030 strategy, our answer to climate change. A number of projects within that programme. We're in the process of setting up a programme board to oversee all the projects that we have within that programme area and then take that forward as a cohesive strategy. So I think it's my turn to pay tribute not only to the officers that have produced this report, which is an excellent report, and has been said, one of the most important reports that we will actually receive. However, I'd also like to pay tribute to those officers behind this report that are populated by doing the work behind all these programmes that I've outlined. To me, this report is immense, meaningful, but overall essential. And let's not forget, this report is shaped by the people of Bridgend County Borough Council. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Young. Bring in Councillor Matthew Voisey now, please.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Apologies for not using the background, but I can't get it on my home equipment, so I'm just using my standard background. I too think that obviously this year has been extraordinary, and officers have done a tremendous job in being flexible, and this report obviously takes account of that. However, I still think that moving forward, we need to be very, very careful in how we look and establish some of the targets. Whilst I accept that this year will be used to establish many new baselines because clearly things are different. We need to have some mechanism to ensure that those baselines don't give us easy goals because of the low starting points. And I just need some assurance that that will be the case, because clearly many things haven't been able to be progressed this year. I also want to ask a question about the homeless and in fact the additional dwellings created as a result of bringing empty properties back into use, where we achieved 20 results in the previous year. We're targeted for 5 this year. I'd be interested to know if we actually achieved that and what we've achieved this year, but only 7 for next year. And bearing in mind the homeless situation, I'm just wondering whether that's not a particularly unambitious target and should actually be nearer the 20 achieved last year. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Voisey. Jill, do you want to come back on that? And Councillor Richard Young, can you take your hand down, please?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Apologies, Mr. Mayor.
Just to reassure Councillor Voisey, there'll be absolutely no sort of relaxation of performance assessment and quality improvements. The corporate performance assessment process will continue. We will continue to challenge targets, and as you know, that comes through the Corporate Overview and Scrutiny Committee regularly. And there will be no relaxation in terms of targets, but I think I'm sure you will agree that some of them just were not likely to be realistic in the way that they had been set. What we will do is, where they are comparable, obviously, to previous years, we will use that as a benchmark and look at what happened previously and take last year out of the equation as an anomaly, so that we have some idea. But where they are new targets and we expected to collect them last year, and in some cases that will be the case for social care targets that we were expecting to create a baseline last year, then we will move that forward. So just to reassure you, there will still be the challenge. You as members will still be able to challenge us and ask us quite rightly, are the targets challenging enough? So there'll be no relaxation on that. In terms of the housing question, I think that's an entirely reasonable question. We did have huge success in the first year. Obviously, last year has been really difficult to deliver on this ambition, and there is also some diminishing returns on some of this work. So we will take those targets away and we will refresh them if we feel that we can achieve more than we are. There are a number of schemes that will help in terms of our empty homes. So we've got the Housing Renewal Empty Properties Recurrent Capital Budget, but we've also got 2 Welsh Government schemes, one of which hasn't started yet, but we've got the Valleys Task Force Empty Properties grants, some of which is funded by BCBC, and the new Western Valley Empty Homes pilot. So we will be looking at those targets again, just to give reassurance, to make sure that we are being ambitious enough, but it has been fraught with difficulties in the last year.
Thank you very much, Jill. Yeah, thank you. Next is Councillor Stuart Baldwin, please.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And just as chair of the COVID recovery panel, I'd just like to thank all the work of the officers that's been done in relation to refreshing this corporate plan, but also to thank the scrutiny staff that supported the COVID recovery panel. And just to support the fact that this refreshed corporate plan just shows that Bridgend is being responsive and flexible in its approach to the way that it's working. So it isn't a question, it's just more a statement to support the fact that this corporate plan plan is welcomed. So thank you very much, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Baldwin. Councillor Denisha Patel, please.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I was just going to speak in response to Councillor Voisey's point about the target for empty properties. The target is set for April to March next year, and I did look at this in detail with the officers, and we have gone down the route of achievable and realistic, as opposed to just setting a target that we know we're not going to achieve. I think Jill mentioned that we will review it going on, but you know, at the moment we are still in COVID times, and we're not sure when that's going to end, in order for us to be able to kind of get back to some normality. So that's the reason why it's quite a difference between the one that we had prior to COVID. But you know, the target is the target, and we will be looking to improve upon that going forward once we know that we can.
Very sensible. Thank you, Councillor Patel. Councillor Hugh David, leader.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just also in response to Councillor Voice's question and comment, is to make the point that the corporate plan is the first document that our regulators will read when they are reviewing, inspecting and assessing the authority. And they, of course, will look at the targets, and there is an expectation that those targets are stretching but achievable. So there is that external challenge around the plan, and as the Chief Officer has explained, the plan and the success of the plan is also monitored by the Corporate Performance Assessment Framework. So quarterly we will meet, and all the Overview and Scrutiny Committee chairs, Councillor Green, Blundell and Gifford, will review the plan and review progress of the plan and the targets as part of that performance assessment. So that should be reassurance that the targets will be stretching, they will be ambitious, but they will also need to be achievable as well. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Leader. I have no other speakers. The report has been moved and seconded. Are we all in favour?
Aye.
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 Okay.
Yeah.
Right, thank you. I'll take that as carried then. Thank you very much. We're then moving on to item 7, report of the Interim Chief Officer Finance and Performance, and obviously that is Jill again, please. Jill.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. For the purposes of the recording, Jill Lewis, Interim Chief Officer Finance, Performance and Change. I've also got my deputy with me today, Deb Exton. And I just want to pay my own thanks to Deb and the team for the reports that you have in front of you this afternoon. And I'm sure that Deb will join me in answering any questions that Council may have afterwards. So if I take you through the Mtfs report, Mr. Mayor, so the purpose of the report today is to seek Council approval of the medium-term financial strategy 21-22 to 24-25, which is attached at Annex 3. And that includes a financial forecast for 21-25, a detailed revenue budget for 21-22 next year, and a capital programme for 2021 to 2030-31. Just to remind Council, the capital programme is a 10-year programme. So the corporate plan and the medium-term financial strategy identify the Council's service and resource priorities for the next 4 financial years, but with particular focus obviously on 21-22. And as we've heard from the leader, the MTFS supports the 3 wellbeing objectives and identifies resource priorities for the next 4 years. It focuses on how the Council intends to respond to the forecasted public sector funding reductions as a result of ongoing austerity and increasing pressures on public sector services, which have been exacerbated, as we know, during the COVID-19 pandemic. It also sets out the approaches and principles that the Council will follow to ensure the Council remains financially sustainable and delivers on its corporate wellbeing objectives. So just to remind Council, you are required to approve a balanced budget for the following financial year and to set the Council tax rates for the county borough. And this report sets out the proposals to achieve that objective and to contribute towards a sustainable position going into the medium term. It's important to note the impact of COVID on the financial position of the Council. You will have heard me talk about that a number of times, and the additional cost pressures that have come with it, along with a significant loss of income. And both central government and Welsh Government have played a significant role in mitigating a large proportion of these losses through the various funding streams, most notably the COVID-19 Hardship Fund. Some of these additional pressures are obviously not recurrent, but there are a number that will require longer term funding as new ways of working are embedded into the Council's business as usual, and those are reflected in the MTFS. So the announcement of the final local government settlement for 21-22 is approximately 2 months later than previous years due to the delay in the outcome of the comprehensive spending review by the UK government. And that was obviously as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic. The final settlement is not due to be announced until the 2nd of March 2021. And as a result, this budget is being proposed on the basis of the provisional settlement received in December 2020. That's no different from last year. Council received the same sort of MTFS based on a provisional settlement. We're not anticipating any significant change in funding between the provisional and final settlement, but any changes will be reported back to Council at a later date. We're not envisaging any changes that would impact on council tax. So the Council's approach to meeting its responsibilities under the Wellbeing of Future Generations Act is set out in 7.3 of the cover report. So this report outlines the financial issues that the Council are requested to consider as part of the MTFS 21-22 to 24-25. I'm expected to report annually on the robustness of the level of reserves. I can say that the level of council reserves is sufficient to protect the council in light of unknown demands or emergencies and current funding levels, but it must be emphasised that the biggest financial risk the council is exposed to at present time relates to the uncertainty of Welsh Government funding, including funding to mitigate the effects of COVID. The increasing difficulty in the delivery of planned budget reductions that you'll see in the MTFS, as well as the identification of further proposals over the period of the MTFS. Therefore, it is imperative that the council fund balance is managed in accordance with the MTFS Principle 9 as set out in the MTFS, and it's essential that revenue, service expenditure and capital expenditure is contained within the identified budgets. I'm also expected to report to council if I don't believe that we have sufficient resource to discharge my role as required by Section 114 of the Local Government Act 88. Members should note that there is sufficient resource to discharge this role. So the budget includes estimates that take into account circumstances and events which exist or are reasonably foreseeable at the time of preparing the budget, and never in all my career have I felt less certain about the foreseeable future in terms of the budget. But nevertheless, the circumstances that are reasonably foreseeable have been taken into account. The budget's been prepared following consultation with all members, the School Budget Forum and service managers, and subject to the risks identified, provides a firm basis for managing the Council's resources for the year 21-22 and beyond. There are 3 annexes attached to the cover report. Annex 1 is the Equality Impact Assessment. Annex 2 shows how the MTFS meets the Wellbeing of Future Generations Act, and Annex 3 is the MTFS itself. And Mr. Mayor, I just would like to go through the MTFS and pull out some pertinent points. The MTFS is split into 5 sections for ease of reference. Section 1 covers the aims and purpose, principles and overview. And it articulates how the Council plans to use its resources to support the achievement of the wellbeing objectives and statutory duties, including the management of financial pressures and risks over the next 4 years. It includes the principles that will govern the strategy and a 4-year financial forecast, comprising detailed proposals for 21-22 and outline proposals for 22-23 and 24-25. The capital programme for 2021 to 2030-31 linked to priority areas for capital investment based on the Council's capital strategy and also the corporate risk assessment. I think it's worth remembering that over the last 10 years, the Council has made £68 million of budget reductions, and that's shown in chart 1 at 131, which represents almost 25% of the Council's current budget. The Council's funding comes from a variety of sources. The majority comes through the Welsh Government, through the RSG and a share of non-domestic rates. And we supplement that through council tax collection, other grants and fees and charges. And just to remind Council, the council tax is made up of 3 elements: the council charge, the community council charge and the police and crime commissioner charge. And it funds approximately 30% of the budget. The quarterly reports to Cabinet on the revenue position for 2021 have outlined in detail the impact on the budget of the additional cost pressures and the loss of income faced by the Council throughout the year as a result of the pandemic. Welsh Government has played a significant role in mitigating the majority of these losses. However, Cabinet and Council now need to consider the longer-term impact of the pandemic and how it will shape the Council as part of that recovery programme, which comprises restart, recover and renew. And clearly, budget planning for the financial year 21-22 is even more uncertain than usual due to the impact of the pandemic, which is on top of the uncertainties that we talked about last year for the end of the Brexit transition period. As I say, both UK Government and the Welsh Government have been supportive of the initial additional costs and burdens that have emerged and covered most of the directly incurred costs, but it does remain, I have to say, unclear how much of the loss of income and additional cost pressures will be covered as we move forward into the medium term, and we will undoubtedly as a council face additional challenges. There's likely to be an impact on the levels of income. Leisure, car parking, rental income, for example, could become medium-term problems. Additional call on the council tax reduction scheme in view of the inevitable economic impact. And the level of council tax, sadly, is estimated to fall even further. Furthermore, there's ongoing expenditure on matters relating to public health. Acronyms perhaps that most of us hadn't heard of before: test, trace and protect, personal protective equipment, arrangements for public vaccination programme and additional COVID enforcement, as well as other expectations with regard to addressing homelessness more robustly and supporting social care sustainably, all likely to be immensely significant going forward. So in these circumstances, setting a balanced budget for 21-22 is even more challenging than usual. Section 2 sets out the context of the MTFS and some key financial and non-financial statistics. So just a couple of things to draw members' attention to in this section. The projected net position for the year end is an underspend as at the end of December of 691k, and that's shown in table 2. Due to the COVID pandemic, the position during this financial year has been incredibly fluid and relies heavily on securing additional funding from the Welsh Government, as I've said previously. The directorate position has improved significantly since Q2, and we hope that this will continue to improve through to the end of the financial year. In terms of financial reserves, the council fund balance has steadily risen over the last 10 years, and you will recall me talking about this a number of times to council. Its current value is just over 9 million, that's shown in table 4, and that represents about 3.4% of the net revenue budget, or just over 5%, sorry, 5% of the net revenue budget excluding schools. Now that aligns with MTFS Principle 9 that states that the council fund balance should be set at a prudent but not excessive level. This will normally be maintained at a level of 5% of the council's net budget, excluding schools. And that's where we've tried to maintain it, and thankfully we have been able to keep it at that level. Table 5 sets out the main findings from the budget consultation Fit for the Future, which gives members some really helpful findings, I think, on services for the future. And in addition to the public consultation, Cabinet and CNB have been working with the Budget Research and Evaluation Panel over the last 6 months to facilitate the budget planning process. The draft budget report approved by Cabinet in January has also been scrutinised by the Council's scrutiny committees, resulting in a report to Cabinet on the 9th of February from the Corporate Overview and Scrutiny Committee, outlining a number of recommendations. You will see that Cabinet have considered those cost recommendations, which include the recommendations from BREP, and the response to those is provided in Appendix A. Section 3 sets out the economic context and the financial climate. And as I said earlier, as a result of the late announcement of the comprehensive spending review, Welsh Government decided to defer the announcement of the draft budget until the 21st and the 22nd of December. And that means the delay in the final settlement until the 2nd of March. So Bridgend's draft MTFS was presented to Cabinet on the 19th of January, based on the provisional settlements before being submitted for scrutiny. Bridgend's published provisional settlement was an increase in AEF of 4.3%. Councils are not expected to receive the final settlements until the 2nd of March, but the headline figure is an overall increase of 3.8 across Wales, and for Bridgend an increase of 4.3%, so a net gain which is obviously very pleasing for the council. That comes to around just over 9 million. 3.3 sets out the forecast financial position, and members will note that we have revised our planning assumptions. Nevertheless, it's predicted that we'll still require 22 million budget reductions being met from directorate and corporate budgets over the MTFS period, and those are referred to later in the report. The Council's corporate risk assessment identifies the key corporate risks and mitigating actions and is attached at Appendix B. This has been regularly reviewed during the financial year to take into account risks arising from COVID and has been scrutinised thoroughly by the Governance and Audit Committee. And those risks have been taken into account in the preparation of the MTFS. And where there are identifiable financial implications, they've been provided for either within the budget or within earmarked reserves. Section 4 sets out the revenue budget for 21-22. That's set out in detail in Table 9, with further detail in Table 10, and the funding of the budget is shown in Table 11. The one issue that I want to draw members' attention to is the significant increase in pressures facing the Council. Those are set out in Appendix C and total 7.5 million recurring for 21-22, with a further 7 million for future years, and that obviously presents us with an immense challenge going forward. Appendix D sets out the budget reduction proposals for 21-22. Appendix E sets out the fees and charges, charge increases, and Appendix F and G sets out the detailed directorate budgets for the year. 4.2 sets out the capital programme for 21-22 to 2030-31 and the capital financing. That's obviously been developed in line with the MTFS principles and the Council's capital strategy, and reflects the Welsh Government capital settlement for 21-22. Obviously, the programme's been revised during the year. It's been brought to Council on a number of occasions. And you will see at 426 any changes to be built into the programme since Council in January 2021 are set out, and the revised capital programme is set out in Appendix H. 4.3 sets out the position on the Council's reserves, with the reserves and balances protocol attached at Appendix I. This also sets out the principles used to assess the adequacy of the reserves, the rationale for establishing reserves, and the arrangements for monitoring reserves. That's an incredibly important appendix for members. It also sets out the forecast movement in the Council's earmarked reserves by the end of 2021 and 21-22. 4.4 sets out the position on council tax. The final revenue budget shown at Table 10 includes a council tax increase of 3.9% as proposed in the draft Mtfs report to Cabinet in January 2021. This is lower than the proposed increase of 4.5% included in the budget consultation, and reflects the views of the majority of respondents who were in favour of only increasing council tax slightly or up to 4.5% to protect the most important services. It also takes into account the better than anticipated settlement, but mindful of ongoing pressures facing the council. So finally, Section 5 sets out the longer term considerations for the MTFS, some of which are certain, and as I've said earlier, many of which are very much uncertain, as we are today. The longer term outlook is not intended to be a 10-year budget strategy tool in the same way that the medium term financial strategy is for the next 4 years. As you can imagine, there are so many political, financial, social and economic variables. It wouldn't be possible to forecast the level of funding available to the Council in 10 years' time. Nevertheless, it does provide a financial framework to reference against when preparing both annual and long-term financial plans. So it focuses on the longer-term financial outlook, the cost pressures, the potential risks, the major timelines for key contracts, and economic factors that will affect the financial health of the organisation for the next 10 years if the current direction of travel continues. So we tried to set out future sources of funding, the best estimate really of future Welsh Government grant levels and council tax income, future cost pressures, which includes general inflation, potential pay awards, pension, etc., and the council's strategy to meet those challenges. We hope that that'll help members in continuing to manage the financial position in periods of huge uncertainty. So, Mr. Mayor, apologies for the length of delivery today. That completes the summary of the MTFS, but I thought it was important that I gave you the detail in order to inform Council. I'll take you to the recommendations at 9.1. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Jill. You've obviously had a very difficult time balancing that, I should think, and given it a great deal of thought. Not my cup of tea, that's for sure. Thank you for that. Before we come on to the speakers, can I have a mover, please, for the report?
Move.
And the second?
Second.
Thank you very much. I have a number of speakers. I would just remind members to try and keep it succinct and to the point, so that we give everybody a reasonable chance to put their point across. Okay, first one then, Councillor Howell Williams, please.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and can I just begin by thanking Jill and Deb and the team for all the hard work that they've put into preparing the documents before us this afternoon. It's an absolute mountain of work, and you know, the hours that they put into to preparing this and going through all the tables and making sure everything adds up. It's no mean feat, I can assure you.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. Yeah.
So as Jill has pointed out, the purpose of the report this afternoon is to set a balanced budget and ultimately to agree the council tax for this year. The background to this is 10 years of cuts. We have had to make £68 million worth of reductions to council services, and that is 25% of the total council budget. So the budget setting process began 11 months ago, and at that point we needed to find about £8 million to fill the gap that was identified by the MTFS that we approved this time last year. And so to fill that gap, I can assure you there were many unpleasant and unpalatable, difficult proposals that we had to consider. And I believe the council tax rate at that time, considered by BREP, was 6.5%. That was the only way that we could see that we could protect vital services and deliver a balanced budget at that time. So BREP met a number of times over the summer. It's a cross-party. There was opportunities to contribute from members across the council political spectrum. We had meetings with all directors, and there was opportunity there to quiz directors on those proposals and with a view to finding alternatives or to fully understand the impact of those proposals. So that took us through the summer, and then we had the public consultation late summer, early autumn, and it was a very difficult year for the consultation team. and I'd like to thank Nick for all the work that you put into that. You know, doing a public budget consultation in the middle of a pandemic was a very difficult task. But I'd like to thank all the members of the public that did take the trouble to respond to that consultation, because it does form a valuable part of the budget setting process. So it did come as a very welcome relief when Welsh Government set their draft budget in December, that we were going to, it looked like we were going to have an extra £9 million, and that was a little late. It was just before Christmas, and I think Deb and the team had a bit of a panic on, but they did fantastic work over the holiday period to prepare a draft budget. That extra funding enabled us to revisit the budget cuts that were we thought we'd have to make at that time. So we'd done a complete rethink across all council services, and obviously the first one that we managed to take out was the 1% efficiency cut for schools. That enabled us to put £1 million straight back into the schools budget. This year, probably more than other years, we've had significant pressures, and some of it has been for the COVID pandemic, but others as well has been outside of that area. The homelessness pressure, it's something that's a policy that's come from Welsh Government, and we have had some funding towards it, but it by no means have covered the whole cost of putting the homelessness service where we want it to be, and we've still got some work to do on that. That has created a huge pressure, but it's a very vital part of work. The pupil numbers in our schools have risen over the last year. We've made a commitment, and I'm very proud to say we made a commitment to be a real living wage employer in 2020, but the real living wage and the living wage does come with a cost pressure. And so we managed to be able to find the money to do that. Now, the London government might think it's a good idea to have a pay freeze. I don't agree with that, and therefore we have maintained our usual pressure for the pay and prices to reward local government employees for the sterling and hard work that they do. On top of that, there is still much uncertainty ahead of us. We're still in the pandemic. We're still in a tier 4 lockdown. And obviously we hope that will recover soon. But the fact is, as of today, we are meeting remotely, we're in a pandemic, and we are still in lockdown. The impact of Brexit is yet to be apparent upon us. We don't know what the financial impact of that would be. So we need to be prudent, and we need to ensure that we've got sufficient resources to meet any impact on that. And again, inflation. We don't know where inflation is going to go. The COVID pandemic has cost the country a huge amount of money, and that will have to be paid for at some point. And therefore, we need to be careful and prudent in managing our resources going forward. So, Mr. Mayor, from a starting point of 6.5% of council tax to fill the gap, we have made what we believe to be a very prudent decision, and we have set council tax at £1,597 for a Band D property. That's an increase of £59 on last year. This balances the budget, and it protects vital frontline services. And I think it puts us in a sensible position to meet the pressures that we face going forward. So thank you for allowing me to make those comments, and I move the recommendation. I support.
Thank you, Councillor Williams. I now have Councillor Nora Clark, please.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I think you used the word succinct, so I will try and be succinct. First of all, I too would like to thank Jill and her team. I can't comprehend how long the report must have taken, and also the Mtfs. It must be an absolute nightmare, and I do thank them for that. I would just like to ask for clarity regarding 9.1. Because there are 5 bullet points there, and bullet point 3 relates to or is tied into the next agenda item. I'm wondering if we are taking a vote on it, whether we would be able to take a vote on each bullet point as they stand. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Councillor Clark. I did put that question to the monitoring officer, and it was suggested that we take the recommendation as a whole. But if members do wish to take an item separately, then maybe that's what we will have to do.
If I may come back, and I'm sure Jill will support me on this, but no, the Mtfs has to balance.
Yes.
And so without one, then there is no balance. So you know, it really is an all or nothing vote. I'm sorry.
Yes, so that is the conclusion that the monitoring officer myself came to, that it has to be an all or nothing.
Okay, so, thank you. That's been clarified. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Clark. Councillor Williams, I don't know whether you want to.
Yeah, I'll take my hand down.
Yeah.
I just recognised it. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Clark. Councillor Amanda Williams, please.
I'll take my video off as well.
Hi, sorry, just trying to set up my new video. Mine was with regards to the sports pitches. Quick question. There was a BCBC press release a couple of weeks ago saying that there'd be no pitch higher price hike, and that clubs weren't going to have to pay any extra, and there'd be investment into the pitches. So what I wanted to know is, I just wanted clarification on the position of the £300,000 saving, because I think some of the groups are saying they don't have to go forward with the asset transfers anymore. But is that 300,000 reliant on all these groups continuing with the asset transfer process? Because if it is, I think it just needs to be clarified for them, because if any of them pull out, then we're not going to achieve that saving. Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor Williams. Jill, do you want to come back on that?
I think Janine will probably want to come in and answer that, Mr. Mayor. Thank you.
Janine?
Good afternoon, Mr. Mayor. Yes, of course, I can answer that question. Councillor Williams, the 300,000 saving is predicated on moving forwards and cap transfers within the next year, but it doesn't mean that's all cap transfers across the borough, because the savings from that is significantly higher than 300,000. It's just on the ones that we think can be progressed within the next year, and that's what we're concentrating on now. I'll make sure that any communication that goes out about the cap transfer makes this very clear. That's still what we would encourage people to do, to come forward and apply for cap transfers, because it's a sustainable way of ensuring we've got those pitches for the future against our financial austerity background. But as it stands, the 300,000 is for next financial year and not all cap transfers. Thank you.
Thank you, Janine. Next speaker is Councillor Lynn Walters, please.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and I'd also like to thank all of the officers for all of the hard work in pulling together this very complex Mtfs. Just one thing I just wanted to clarify, though, is that the corporate risk assessment, it was brought to the Governance and Audit Committee in January. However, the two final risks on the risk assessments, risks number 14 and 15, which are on page 165 of the members' packs, were in draft. And at the time, there was no assessment as to the level of the risks. During that meeting, I asked if both of those risks were COVID related, and officers said they needed to get clarity. I also commented then that if they weren't COVID-related risks, it appeared that there are major concerns around school standards, which would be of interest to all members. This document has now come and is part of the Mtfs, and the new documentation shows that risk 14 is COVID related. However, risk 15 is not specifically COVID related and is the biggest risk contained within the corporate risk assessment that's facing the council, both in raw measurement and after the proposed actions. Now, I appreciate a lot of members won't be as familiar with the risk scoring as I am. So before any action was taken, the likelihood of this risk manifesting itself was above 80%. And with the actions that are proposed, the likelihood has dropped, but only to between 60 and 79%. But of more importance, the potential impacts are long-term loss of service capability, long-term negative perception of council, litigation is certain and impossible to defend, significant corporate budget realignment, and breaches of law punishable by imprisonment. So whilst I accept that the Section 151 officer has said that all risks within the corporate risk assessment with identifiable financial implications are provided in the budget or earmarked reserves, where the risks aren't clearly covered by the council fund, I'd like the Cabinet Member for Education to actually explain what is behind this risk and to give assurance that there is sufficient budget provision in place to address what has been documented as the biggest risk facing this council. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Waters. Councillor Smith, do you wish to respond?
I'd like to explain that these risk assessments aren't specifically directed to individual cabinet members. These are dealt with across the corporation. We do have a one council policy. I can assure you that given the extra support that's given to education, that there is sufficient reserve there to cover the risks. If you want some more detailed analysis, I'll hand over either to the Director of Education or the Director of Finance, whichever one wants to come in.
Jill or Lynn? Lindsay?
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. For the purpose of the recording, I'm Lindsay Harvey. I'm Corporate Director, Education and Family Support. As Councillor Walters has indicated, this is a significant risk. It relates to long-term standards within the local authority, but on this particular area, especially with risk 15, it relates to a COVID-related incident of schools being closed. Now, obviously, there's plenty of mitigation in place here where we are supporting schools with learners being away from school. For example, blended learning processes put in place. But as it identifies there, some of the challenges are particular to some schools. But this is a COVID-related one and is something, obviously, that we are mindful that we are addressing through current practices.
Can I come back, please, Mr. Mayor? Because
yes, just the one, Councillor Walters.
Thank you. Thank you very much for that, Lindsay. But risk 14 is talking about the blended learning and the and it being COVID related. Risk 15 specifically says that it is not just COVID related and it's not just to do with school closures. And so I do challenge on that as to the standards, and if the impacts are such that it doesn't appear that we have sufficient actions in place to address this. And if that information had been to the audit committee, I'm convinced that we would have been challenging and asking for more information.
Lindsay, do you wish to respond?
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. Thanks, Councillor Walters. I think the appropriate thing here is to go back with our improvement partners within Central South Consortium and to test this risk again. I think the point that Councillor Walters made is a very fair one. We'll need to test this, and I think we'll need to come back then to you with further narrative on this, Councillor Walters.
Thank you very much.
Thank you both. Next question then is from Councillor Alex Williams, please.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. I'm afraid I'm unable to support either the MTFS or the proposed council tax increase this year due to the impact that it'll have on the financial well-being of residents. We have the 5th highest provisional local government settlement out of all 22 local authorities in Wales this year, a 4.3% uplift, and that's well above the rate of inflation. We're a net gainer, and given the modest underspend, which Jill has reported, did the administration even consider the council tax should be frozen this year as a one-off accompanied with in-year efficiency savings? For many people, after their mortgage or rent, council tax represents one of their biggest monthly outgoings. So does the leader and cabinet member consider that increasing council tax pressures on families during a pandemic is inconsistent with all of our corporate plan wellbeing objectives, which we have just agreed? I'd be grateful for your views on the following. For me, it decreases people's prosperity rather than boost it. Second, it fails to support a sustainable economy because it takes money out of people's pockets who would otherwise spend their money to support the local economy. Third, it fails to help people in communities to become more resilient because they are pushed into further deprivation when their family incomes are impacted. And fourth, it also shields the council from being genuinely self-reflective when it comes to the smarter use of resources. I cannot believe that an organisation the size of BCBC with a gross revenue budget of £435 million can't make £3 million of efficiency savings in back office functions which do not affect the delivery of frontline services, so that there can be a freeze in council tax, a one-off freeze for 1 year to shield the people of BCBC from an additional financial burden. Finally, during the MTFS scrutiny, I asked the Cabinet to lobby the Welsh Government for additional funding to fully fund its legislative commitments, which will put a financial burden of £4 million on this local authority. This includes the ALN bill, measures to tackle homelessness, and the local government elections bill. So can you confirm what the Cabinet is doing on a political level to ensure that the Welsh Government commitments are fully funded? We live in extraordinary times and must be mindful of our constituents' financial circumstances. So therefore, I can't in all consciousness heap a further burden on the residents of Pencoed and Helakew. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Williams. Leader, Councillor Hewlett.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Mayor. Thank you for that question, Councillor Williams. Every one of the 22 local authorities in Wales are having to increase their council tax this year. Every local authority across the UK is having to increase their council tax this year because of the pressures that we all face, pay pressures, pressures around COVID. And these are pressures that if we don't meet them this year, we will have to meet them next year. It would be irresponsible of us to use reserves. We cannot use reserves to fund a council tax freeze. And what I would remind colleagues of is that we have made savings of over £65 million in the last 10 years in this authority. We have made and lost over 440 posts and people from this organisation. We have made difficult decisions around services that people treasure and are important to people in the borough. And we'll continue to make difficult decisions, and we've continued to make savings. There are some in the budget here today. Now, if there are £3 million worth of savings that can be made to backroom services, then of course we would want to hear those proposals from members. We wanted to hear them obviously in the scrutiny process, but I have not seen those proposals come forward. We continue to challenge officers on a daily basis around how we can make more savings as an organisation, and we'll continue to do that as members would expect us to do and as you ask us to do. But we are not able to identify any more savings than are included in this report. If we could make those savings, we would be bringing them to you here today. We will continue to make the case. We meet with Welsh Government on a weekly basis. We have had additional funding from the Welsh Government. That is to be welcomed. However, we do not know what will happen in the future. We do not know what will happen in the next few months, even in terms of our budget, because we are still in the midst of a global pandemic. I do understand, I completely understand the point that Councillor Williams is making about the council tax increase and the impact that will have. I would urge any resident who's having a problem with their council tax to get in touch with the local authority. We can look at the way that the payments are made and the period over which those payments are made. And indeed, we can look at the council tax reduction scheme. And many, many more residents have applied for that council tax reduction scheme and are receiving support from the local authority to help with the council tax, where their financial circumstances have changed very suddenly and dramatically as a result of the pandemic. And I'm sure the Deputy Leader will want to come in case I've missed anything. Thank you, Mr Mayor, and thank you, Councillor Williams.
Thank you, Leader. Councillor Williams, did you want to come back?
Yeah, I'm happy to, well, I'll be brief, but I'm happy to make a
succinct, please.
Yes, succinct, yes. I think it's our starting point is always zero council tax. Believe it or not, that is our starting point, but we have a gap to fill. And you know, we make those reductions that we feel are safe to do, and we have to consider the pressures that and some pressures we reject and we turn away. But this has been through the scrutiny process. Those reductions have been scrutinised. In fact, there was a 4-day scrutiny session, and the reductions have been scrutinised. The pressures have been scrutinised. To find that £3 million, you know, if it's so easily to spot, then I'd be welcome to have a look at that. Regarding the council tax reduction, that we do spend £15 million on council tax reduction. That is largely funded by Welsh Government, but there is a significant contribution from Bridgend County Borough Council, and every family, every household in the county borough that's receiving universal credit will get assistance paying their council tax. Now, I know across Wales we take a Band D council tax because that is the average, but in Bridgend we've got more properties below Band D, and the actual average price of the council bill in Bridgend is £1,334. That's how much people pay in Bridgend, the average, and 20,000 of those households will get assistance through the council tax reduction scheme.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Alex Williams, did you want to respond at all, please?
Just briefly, if I may, Mr. Mayor, I thank the Leader and the Deputy Leader for responding to some of my questions, but I don't feel that they've fully answered how their proposal for the MTFS and the council tax increase is consistent with our corporate plan objectives. So I'd like them to come back on that if they may. Furthermore, the Deputy Leader in his opening remarks mentioned that the process has gone through full scrutiny. Can I challenge him on that and say that the BREP process is a closed shop? It is not open to all members, and I would be very much grateful if he and his colleagues could review that in future and ensure that all members are in receipt of the documents, even if they are under embargo and confidential. All councillors should be able to review the documents which BREP has, and I've mentioned that on previous occasions. And finally, just referring to the Deputy Leader's comments about the council tax reduction scheme and council tax collection rates, if surely the council tax is going up by 3.9%, or the proposal is that it goes up by 3.9%, then surely people who are suffering from a financial burden following the COVID pandemic will find it more difficult for council tax for them to pay their council tax. So what assessment has been made on council tax collection rates? and what assessment has been made of the potential for people to be eligible for the council tax reduction scheme in the future? Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor Williams. Leader or Deputy Leader, one of you like to come back on that, please?
I can just come back very quickly, Mayor. I'm happy to meet any elected member of the authority if they feel that they need extra information on which to carry out their duties as an elected member. So that invitation goes to all members across the authority. Regarding the council tax collection scheme, that did go to council fairly recently, and I believe that we have committed to reviewing the impact then that the council tax has on low income households.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you, Deputy Leader.
Good.
Moving on. So I've got to move on now. Oh, did you want to come in, Leader?
Yes, we've made a commitment. Just to emphasise, it's in the report. We've made a commitment to review the way that the budget research evaluation panel works, and we will do that, and we will certainly take on board the views of all members. In terms of the budget, though, it's vital that we ensure that we have a balanced budget. So, if we want a lower council tax increase, we need specific proposals, either of cuts, additional cuts that we need to make and where they're going to be made, or we don't accept some of the budget growth that is in the report. And again, we need to know what isn't going to be accepted if there's going to be no increase in the council tax, and that's crucial to set in a balanced budget, and that's our primary duty here today as elected members. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Leader. Right, next speaker then is Councillor Jane Gebby, please.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I think I'd firstly like to thank Jill, Deb and her team specifically for all the work that they have put into it. But as a member of the Corporate Overview and Scrutiny Committee, as a member of the BREC Committee, and as a member of Corporate Overview and Scrutiny 1 and 2, I see most of these proposals come through my committee. So I'm really unsure as to why there is a furore sometimes when it comes to budget setting proposals. I'd also like to raise the fact that £3 million worth of savings equates to about 100 back office staff. And throughout the last 11 years, local government has lost significant numbers of staff, particularly back office, as we renegotiated the way we structured all our service provision. We can't afford to lose anymore. And I'd also like to raise with Councillor Williams the fact that most of those 100 staff would be members of his constituency or my constituency or any number of other members on this call today. And considering our local economy, which is dying throughout the pandemic, I can't not vote for this budget. And the reality for me as a ward member in Pyle is this budget will help us significantly. I closed my primary school last year because we had such problems with asbestos in the ceiling. I know now that they are going to have a school that will be fit for purpose going forward. So can I thank them again, please? Thank you very much. I really do appreciate it, and my constituents certainly will. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Gebby. Next speaker, Councillor Stuart Baldwin, please.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And again, I would like to support what Jane just said in relation to the fact that we're supporting members of our community across this difficult time. And having voted for the corporate plan and sharing of the connectivity between the corporate plan and the MTFS, I am happy to support the work being done to bring empty properties back into use to increase the supply of affordable housing and rent for rent and sale, but also as the chair of the COVID-19 recovery panel, that we have continued our commitment towards funding our third sector partners who have provided vital and valuable support during the pandemic. So I am more than happy to support the budget for this year because of all the work that is being done. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Baldwin. Next, Councillor John Paul Blundell.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. It's coming up now. There I am. I'm back. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'd like to start by echoing the comments of the councillors previously. Have all thanked the officers, Jill, Deb, everyone for their hard work in putting this budget together. I'd just like to thank, first of all, I'd like to thank every member of this council for taking part in the scrutiny process. I know it was a very difficult process at times. As a first-time chair, 4 days of scrutiny, it was rather intense, but I think we got through it. I believe it was a worthwhile process because we've made changes to this budget, and I hope every member can see that. I'd like to thank the Cabinet and senior officers for listening to our concerns and acting upon them when needed. This just proves that the scrutiny process works, and every member should see that and be proud of it. And that's all I wanted to say, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Councillor. Thank you, Councillor Blundell. I have 3 more speakers. I'm not going to take any more after that now because I think this has been well aired. So the next speaker, please, is Councillor Matthew Voisey.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. There was a couple of points that have been raised by, I'm not sure it was the deputy leader or the leader. And the first was, could someone explain why the London government has anything to do with our budget setting? I know of the London Assembly and the UK government in Westminster, but the London government I'm a little bit confused about. And secondly, there were additional savings to be made in the budget process by bringing forward some of the projects for future years. And I did raise this at in the scrutiny, but was advised that because the settlement was better than anticipated, that we don't have to do that yet. So, you know, there could have been additional savings brought forward, but there was no will to do so. And hence the taxpayers of Bridgend are forced to pay more than they possibly could have paid. So whilst I understand the vital role the council plays in providing the services, you know, once again, the taxpayers are paying for it through increased council taxes, which is nothing new during this administration. Yes, we'd all like to have low or zero council tax, and that's what we pledged in our election manifesto, and we will try to keep to that when it's a Conservative administration in this council. However, if perhaps that question could be put to the Deputy Leader, please.
Deputy Leader, do you wish to respond?
Yes, I was referring to the Chancellor of the Exchequer in his statement at the Pass of Westminster. So if that helps, Councillor Voisey. And I don't think I've got much further to add, really. I mean, we've got a balanced budget before us this afternoon. We have considered all the representations being made by the scrutiny process. And you know, it's sort of it's there for everyone to see. You know, I haven't been presented with any alternative suggestions, so you know that's where we are.
Okay, thank you, Deputy Leader. Right, as I said, I've got 2 more speakers, and that's going to be it. The next one, please, is Councillor David White. Can you put your mic on, please?
Even though my looks might make you give an opinion, I've worked in local government for 30 years, working in frontline staff. Now, I couldn't do my job without the support of staff behind who we don't recognise, who we don't see. And I will still have to do my job, but also then cover for the staff who we make cuts to. So I would say a big, you know, clap and a big cheer for backline staff, because they do a tremendous job, and frontline staff couldn't even function without them being in place. So please don't see them as easy hit, because they're very much valuable and welcomed within our staff.
Thank you, Councillor White. Councillor Gareth Howell, please, and then I'll let the leader wind up. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And I'd like to say that endorse the comments about the work that the office has done behind the scenes in preparing this budget, what just been truly a challenging period. I particularly wanted to comment on the proposals to develop Welsh language education in the county borough, because as someone who was one of the first people to undergo Welsh language education all the way through to 18 years of age, I'm really pleased that the council is taking a step forward in producing and developing more new Welsh language, Welsh medium schools, and also the fact that they're responding to the requests for support for additional learning needs for pupils attending Welsh medium education to the Welsh language. I'm really proud of that, and it also goes some way to refuting the allegations that Bridgend Council is anti-Welsh language. So can I pass on my thanks to the officers and the Cabinet for supporting that initiative. And I'd just like to say that criticisms of back office staff are uncalled for, and we should recognise the fact that every council member of staff contributes to the development and the support and the well-being of our communities, and that has been clearly evident during the period of COVID. And if we'd had the cuts that had been proposed, God help us. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Howells. Leader, now would you like to final say, please?
Yes, thank you for that, Mr. Mayor. I just wanted to inform colleagues that, as Councillor Voicy has referred to Conservative administrations, there is one Conservative administration in South Wales, that is Monmouthshire Council, and that is proposing to increase their council tax by 4.9%. And perhaps Councillor Voicy has forgotten, but when he was a member of the Cabinet, the Rainbow Alliance, and he was a member of that Cabinet for 4 years, every year the council tax went up as part of that Conservative coalition that run the authority. So it's not that easy, is it, to find a budget, balance a budget with a council tax freeze or a low council tax increase? Because if it had been that easy, and if it was that easy, then I'm sure Councillor Voicy would have done it when he was a Cabinet member for 4 years. That said, we've got the budget in front of us, and unless there are worked up alternatives, and I mean savings actually identified, or cuts to services, because they are some of the proposals that we are not going to progress this year, then we need to agree today to a balanced budget. We've had months now of talking about this budget. We've had hours and hours and hours of meetings about this budget, and I'm prepared to support this budget today because I have not seen yet an alternative from anyone. I've heard some criticisms, but I have not seen or heard an alternative. I wish there was an alternative that meant we could have a lower council tax, but there is not one in front of us. It has not been proposed. I therefore am happy to support the recommendations, and I hope all members will as well, recognising the responsibilities they have got to set a balanced budget. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Yeah, thank you, Leader. Right, the recommendation was moved by the Deputy Leader. Can I have a seconder for it, please?
Seconded.
Thank you. Now, I'm assuming we will go to a recorded vote on this. So is the Senior Democratic Services Officer ready?
Yes, Mr. Mayor, for the benefit of the recording, I admitted to say who I am earlier when I called members in. I'm Mark Galvin. I'm Senior Democratic Service Officer Committees. I'll be asking each member's name. It'll be alphabetical in surname order, and it's for, against, or abstain for the recommendations of the report.
Thank you.
Councillor Aspey, please.
For.
Councillor Baldwin, please.
For.
Councillor Beadle, please.
Against.
Councillor Blundell, please.
For.
Councillor Burnett, please.
For.
Councillor Mike Clark, please.
Against.
Councillor Nora Clark, please.
Against.
Councillor Richard Collins, please.
For.
Councillor Hugh David, please.
For, please.
Councillor Paul Davis, please.
For, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Pam Davis.
For.
Councillor Sorrel Dendy.
Abstain.
Councillor Keith Edwards. Councillor Keith Edwards. I'll come back to Councillor Edwards. Councillor Jane Gebby.
For, thank you, Mark.
Councillor Tom Gifford.
Against.
Councillor Richard Granville.
For, Mark.
Councillor Cheryl Green. Councillor Green, please.
Abstain.
Thank you. Councillor Gareth Howells.
For.
Councillor Altaf Hussain.
Against.
Councillor Malcolm James.
Abstain.
Councillor Brian Jones.
Against.
Councillor Martin Jones.
For.
Councillor Mike Kern.
For.
Councillor David Lewis. Councillor David Lewis. I'll come back to that, to Councillor Lewis, Mr. Mayor. Councillor Janice Lewis.
Yeah, thank you, Mark. It's for. David's computer went off, so he's just getting back in, okay?
So it's 4 for yourself and 4 for Councillor David Lewis.
If he can come and say it to you now, yeah, fine.
Yeah.
Would that be okay?
Yeah.
David?
Yeah, we need to hear
Yeah.
his voice.
Yeah, okay, here he is.
For. Thank you,
Thank
Mark.
you. Councillor John McCarthy, please.
For.
Councillor Denisha Patel.
For. Thanks,
Councillor Aniel Pachella.
Against.
Councillor James Radcliffe. Councillor Radcliffe, please. I'll have to come back to Councillor Radcliffe, Mr. Mayor.
Yes, okay, Mark.
Councillor Kay Rowlands.
Against.
Councillor Bridie Sedgbeer.
For.
Councillor Rod Shaw.
For.
Councillor Charles Smith.
For.
Councillor Steve Smith.
For.
Councillor John Spanswick.
For.
Councillor Ros Sturman.
Against, please, Mark.
Councillor Gary Thomas.
For.
Councillor Ross Thomas.
Against.
Councillor Tim Thomas.
Against.
Councillor Jeff Tilsley. Councillor Jeff Tilsley.
Oh, God.
I'll come back to Councillor Tilsley. Councillor Elaine Venables.
Against.
Councillor Sadie Vidal.
Against.
Councillor Matthew Voisey.
Against.
Councillor Lynn Walters.
Against.
Councillor Ken Watts.
Abstain.
Councillor Caroline Webster.
Against.
Councillor Dave White.
For.
Councillor Phil White.
For, please, Mark.
Councillor Alex Williams.
Against.
Councillor Amanda Williams.
Against.
Councillor Howell Williams.
For.
Councillor Julia Williams.
Against.
And Councillor Richard Young.
For.
Right, Mr. Mayor, we need to go back to Councillor Keith Edwards.
Yes, I can see his microphone is on.
Against.
Against. We need also to go back to Councillor James Radcliffe.
I don't believe Councillor Radcliffe is in the meeting.
I don't believe he's in the meeting, no.
No, I haven't heard anything.
Councillor Tilsley, please, are you there? Councillor Tilsley is in the meeting, Mr. Mayor. He's in the meeting by phone and he's on the display unit. Am I able to... Councillor Tilsley, am I able to contact him or not?
Yes, I think you can try and contact him, please, Mark.
Right. I'll put my mic off a sec.
Yeah, but we need to hear him when he responds.
Absolutely. Give me 2 seconds, Mr. Mayor.
Mr. Mayor, just a point of order, if I may. Will we be making this much effort to contact Councillor Radcliffe?
Well, the arrangement was in place.
Sorry, Mr. Mayor. He's called a point of order. What is the point that has been breached as part of the Constitution?
Yeah, you're quite right. Yeah, can you nominate the point of order, please, within the Constitution?
Well, I don't think it necessarily is in the Constitution, but...
Then there is no point of order if there is no breach of the Constitution, Tim.
Can I just say, though, that this was a previous arrangement and it has been done before with Councillor Tilsley?
Can I call a point of order there, Mr. Mayor?
Yeah, okay.
Did you call in Councillor Baldwin or did he just speak over you?
There is no requirement to call somebody in for a point of order.
All right, gentlemen, leave it there, please.
You've been placed on hold. Please wait. You've been placed on hold. Please wait.
Can you hear us, Mark?
I can't seem to get hold of Councillor Tilsley, even though he was on the phone and he is in this meeting. I've rang him on his landline and his mobile number, and he hasn't answered.
Okay, well, we'll have to leave it there then. We can't wait any longer. Okay, Mark, we've had all the others. So if you and Michael can check and cross-check, we will call I'll call it a 6-minute break. We'll come back at 17:10.
Thank you.
So all members, we're having a 6-minute break.
Mr. Mayor, do you mind if I ask you a question before you disappear?
You just about called me, Stuart.
I know I just did, and it is very quick. I just want you to be able to clarify with our monitoring officer on legal advice, please. The leader of the Conservatives called the fact that in relation to my questioning in relation to the standing orders, can you actually check with our legal officer whether I am required to be called in by the Mayor to raise a point of order, or am I just expected to be able to raise it from that point?
Well, I know what my answer is, but I'll come back to you.
Thank you.
Are you there, Mark?
Yes, Mr. Mayor, I'm here. Yeah.
And do we have the result?
Yes. For the recommendations of the report, 27, against 20, abstentions 4.
Thank you very much. Therefore, the motion is carried. Thank you very much. I assume everybody's back. Before I move on to item 8 on the agenda, I think Councillor Julia Williams wishes to say something.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'd just like to apologise to you, Mr. Mayor, and to the members for leaving my microphone on. I had my microphone on ready to vote, and I was exasperated because some people couldn't be got hold of, and I said to myself, oh God. So I apologise to you and to other members, and I hope I'm forgiven. Thank you very much.
Yes, you are, Councillor Williams. Thank you very much. Okay, we are now moving on to item 8 of the report, and Jill Lewis, again, item 8 of the agenda rather. Jill Lewis, please.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. For the purposes of the recording, Jill Lewis, Chief Officer, Interim Chief Officer, Finance, Performance and Change. The report you have in front of you this afternoon is the Council Tax Report, and the purpose of this report is to provide Council with details of the Council Tax requirement for the County Borough Council, together with the requirements of the Police and Crime Commissioner for South Wales and Community Town Councils, and to seek Council approval of the Band D Council Tax for Bridgend County Borough Council and the community areas for 21-22. So this is a technical report following the approval of the budget. The Council, as the billing authority, is required to formally approve the Council tax for its area. Council tax collected from local residents, as you heard in the Mtfs, makes up almost 30% of the funding of the Council's net revenue budget. When the Council tax base for 21-22 was approved by Council in November 2020, the estimated collection rate was reduced from 98% to a lower figure of 97.5%, and that was to reflect the current economic circumstances surrounding the COVID-19 pandemic. The higher number of citizens facing economic hardship and the current collection rates, which, as I've alluded to, are still dipping, unfortunately. That has led to a reduction in the net tax base for 21-22. So Council has just approved the budget for 21-22, as shown in Table 1 of this report. The amount to be funded from Council tax is shown as £86,764,691, and that's shown in Table 2, which equates, as we've heard this afternoon, to a Council tax of 1597.01 on a Band D property, an increase of 3.9%. The proposed increase of 3.9% equates to 77 pence per week for a person living in a Band A property, and about 1.15 pounds per week for somebody living in a Band D property. And just to remind Council, 62% of properties in Bridgend are lower than a Band D property. The Police and Crime Commissioner for South Wales has notified the Council that their precept for the financial year ending 31st of March 2022 will rise to £15.5 million, which equates to a council tax of £287.72 on a Bands B property, as shown in Table 3, and that's a 5.5% increase, Mr Mayor. The 21-22 precept was agreed by the South Wales Police and Crime Panel on the 3rd of February 2021. The average council tax for Bridgend and its precepting bodies is shown in Table 4 and 5, and Table 6 sets out how the council tax will meet the net budget requirements for the council and its precepting authorities, with Table 7 setting out what that means over each of the areas for a Band D property. The resulting charges for each band are set out in Appendix A. And that was all I wanted to say this afternoon, Mr Mayor, on council tax. I take you to the recommendations at 9.1.
Thank you, Jill, once again. Can I have a mover for that, the report, please?
Move.
Second.
Second.
I assume that all members are not in favour. Yeah, we've got two speakers now. So, Councillor Matthew Voisey.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Could I ask the chair of the South Wales Police and Crime Panel, Councillor Richard Young, whether he supported the 5.5% increase in the police precept, or did he vote against it?
Thank you. Councillor Young, please.
Yes, thank you so much. I think it's fair to say that I supported the increase for this year on the basis that I believe that the crime and the Crime and Police Commissioner was put in an invidious situation by Westminster. And the reason for that is that Westminster have changed the terms of the grant that they give all police forces, not only in Wales, but in the whole of the UK, where they have decided that they would give every police force a fixed amount of money. And that meant that on this occasion, that fixed amount of money for South Wales equated to 5%. There was no room for movement, which meant that there was nowhere to go. And unfortunately, the crime panel itself undertook a lot of questions with the police commissioner, and we were forced into a situation where we couldn't disagree with his assessment. We are not the only police and crime panel that, as a result of those deliberations, have written to the Home Office protesting in the most strong terms of the change in the way that the police force is funded. I hope that answers your question, Councillor.
Thank you, Councillor Young. I have another councillor indicating, Councillor Nora Clark.
Thank you, Mr Mayor, and I know we've gone over this in the previous agenda item, but you know, it's regrettable that a 3.9% council tax increase is being proposed. We found ourselves in unprecedented times due to COVID-19, with many of our residents losing their jobs, unable to pay mortgages, and have found themselves on the breadline, having to use food banks, etc. Many are struggling financially, and I don't believe that we should be considering raising council tax higher than the rate of inflation. Jill did mention when she was going through the report that 60% of properties within the County Borough of Bridgend are below the D band. I would ask perhaps in future years, perhaps we could have a breakdown of you know, the number of properties in each banding. I think sometimes it focuses the mind quite a bit when we understand how many properties are in each actual band. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor Clark. I'm going to ask if everyone's in favour, but if I hear dissent, then we will go to a recorded vote. So is everyone in favour?
Object. No.
Right. Okay.
Yes.
That was clear. Okay, we will go for a recorded vote then. Mark, please.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Have to go through the list again.
Yep, that's fine, Mr. Mayor.
Okay.
Councillor Aspey, please.
Abstain.
Councillor Baldwin.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And having already voted for the budget, I have to vote for this council tax increase, so 4.
Councillor Beadle.
Against.
Councillor Blundell.
4, Mark, thank you.
Councillor Burnett.
I'm for.
Councillor Mike Clark.
Against.
Councillor Nora Clark.
Abstain.
Councillor Collins, please.
4.
Councillor Hugh David.
4, please.
Councillor Paul Davis, please.
4, please, Mark.
Thank you. Councillor Pam Davis, please.
4.
Councillor Sorrel Deddy.
Against, thank you.
Councillor Keith Edwards.
Against.
Councillor Jane Gebby.
4, thank you, Mark.
Councillor Tom Gifford, please.
Against.
Councillor Granville, please.
4, Mark.
Councillor Cheryl Green.
Abstain.
Councillor Gareth Howells, please.
4, Mark, please.
Councillor Altaf Hussain, please.
Against. Thank you.
Councillor Malcolm James.
Abstain.
Councillor Brian Jones.
Against.
Councillor Martin Jones.
4, thank you.
Councillor Mike Kern.
4, Mark.
Councillor David Lewis, please.
4, Mark, thank you.
Councillor Janice Lewis.
4, thank you, Mark.
Councillor John McCarthy.
4, Mark.
Councillor Denisha Patel, please.
4, Mark, thank you.
Councillor Aniel Pachella, please.
Thank you, Mark. Against, please.
Councillor James Radcliffe. I think he's still out of the meeting.
Yeah.
Mr. Mayor, if I just check. Yes.
We didn't get an apology from him, did we?
No.
Oh.
No. Councillor Kay Rowlands, please.
Against.
Councillor Bridie Sedgebeer.
4.
Councillor Rod Shaw.
4.
Councillor Charles Smith.
4, Mr. Mayor. Thank you, Calvin. Thank you, Mark Calvin.
Councillor Steve Smith.
4, Mark, sorry.
Councillor John Spanswick.
4.
Councillor Ros Sturman.
Against, please, Mark.
Councillor Gary Thomas.
4, thank you, Mark.
Councillor Ross Thomas, please.
Against, thanks, Mark.
Councillor Tim Thomas.
Against.
Councillor Tilsley, are you here?
No, he's out.
I think we must accept that he's not part of the meeting.
He's left the meeting.
Yeah.
Councillor Elaine Venables.
Against.
Councillor Sadie Badal.
Against.
Councillor Matthew Voicey.
Against.
Councillor Lynn Walters.
Against.
Councillor Ken Watts.
Abstain.
Councillor Caroline Webster.
Against.
Councillor Dave White.
For. Thank you, Mark.
Councillor Phil White.
For, please, Mark.
Councillor Amanda Williams.
Against.
Councillor Alex Williams.
Against.
Councillor Howell Williams.
For.
Councillor Julia Williams.
Against.
Councillor Richard Young.
For, thanks, Mark.
Give me a couple of minutes, Mayor, to
Yes.
please to tot up. Thank you.
Yes, fine, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. 26 for the recommendation.
Yeah.
20 against and 5 abstentions.
Thank you very much. Therefore, the matter is carried. Thank you. So we now move on to item 9, report of the Interim Chief Officer. Jill, for one more time. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. For the purposes of the recording, it's Jill Lewis, Interim Chief Officer, Finance, Performance and Change. The report in front of you this afternoon is the Treasury Management Strategy and the Capital Strategy. And the purpose of the report is to present to Council both the Treasury Management Strategy for 21-22, which is shown at Appendix A, and that incorporates the borrowing and investment strategies 21-22 and the Treasury management indicators for the period 21-22 to 23-24, and then the capital strategy for 21-22 to 2030-31 is shown at Appendix B, and that includes the prudential indicators and the annual minimum revenue provision statement for 21-22. So if I start, Mr. Mayor, with the Treasury Management Strategy, members will be very aware that the Council's Treasury Management activities are regulated by the Local Government Act, and the strategy has been compiled in accordance with regulations, codes of practice and Welsh Government guidance. Whilst the content of the strategy is very much consistent to previous years, I'd just like to draw focus to the key changes year on year. So section 2 reflects the current economic background, and in particular the holding of interest rates by the Bank of England at 0.1%. You'll recall during the year the interest rates went into negative, and I commented on that to you at Council. They're now at 0.1%. Our Treasury advisors, Arlene Close's view is that they expect this rate to remain the same until the first quarter of 2024. But obviously that remains to be seen. The impact of both the coronavirus pandemic and the exit from the European Union may well influence policy, and so a further reduction to zero or even negative can't be ruled out in the future. And you'll recall I explained to Council that we were actually having to pay to invest our money at one point during the year, something I never thought I would see. Section 2 of the strategy sets out the Council's debt and investment position as at the 31st of December 2020, and further detail as the maturity of the Council's long-term debt has been included as a chart at the top of page 5 of the strategy. That gives you a bit more detail on the Council's current debt profile. Table 2 sets out the Council's forecast need to borrow, taking into account the capital programme and the reserves available in the short term to fund such expenditure. The use of reserves in the short term is prudent, you've heard me say that before, and cost effective. But obviously as these reduce, the need to borrow increases. And it's important to note that the need to borrow will change, dependent on the spending within the capital programme, and this will be closely monitored throughout the year and brought back obviously to you as Council. At the moment, our capital programme is pretty much fully subscribed. We've got limited opportunity to raise funds through capital receipts. We still have some redevelopment opportunities, Porthcawl, Park Avon, Iweni, which may generate capital receipts, but other than that, we will need to borrow to finance our capital programme. An important change to the terms of borrowing that I'd like to draw your attention to is from the Public Works Loans Board, which is a primary source of borrowing for councils and reflected in section 4, the borrowing strategy. I'm expected to certify that the Council's capital programme does not include any intention to purchase investment assets primarily for financial reward, and I'm expected to do that for both the current and the next 2 financial years, and that's irrespective of how that purchase would be funded. So for example, buying a property purely to benefit from the rent returns and capital appreciation rather than for service delivery would be one of those such examples. And I know that Council have raised questions on commercial activity previously. It's a very important change. Table 6 on page 226 reflects a change in the limit of investments in the money market funds. These are a key tool for the Council in investing cash resources, especially when managing grants in relation to COVID from Welsh Government. Our advisors have removed the overall limit of investments in the MMFs, which we had increased to 30 million in November, but we still not invest above 6 million in any one fund, just to give Council reassurance that we're still being very, very careful about spreading our investments. The next change at table 12 is to increase the limit on lending to another entity from 1 million to £2 million. And that's been put in to support the proposed loan to a special purpose vehicle for the delivery of the Bridgend Heat Town network. In terms of the capital strategy, which as I said is at Appendix B, this provides a high-level overview of how capital expenditure, financing and treasury management activity contribute to the provision of services. It's a policy framework document and links very closely, obviously, with the corporate plan, the Mtfs, the Treasury management strategy, and the Council's asset management plan. The strategy informs decisions on capital spending priorities within the Council's 10-year capital programme and sets out what is capital expenditure, why do we incur it, the Council's overall capital objectives, priorities and plans, how the Council's capital expenditure will be funded and resourced, how the Council's capital expenditure plans will be appraised, how capital plans will be approved, monitored and reported upon, and the skills and knowledge required to deliver those capital plans. The capital strategy should be read in conjunction with the Council's TMS, which contains the investment strategy and borrowing strategy, and also the minimum revenue provision statement, which is attached as Schedule A to this document. Whilst much of the context of the capital strategy before you today is similar to previous years, there are a number of changes that I'd just like to draw Council's attention to. The first of those is accounting for leases. There are changes to the way in which leases are accounted for, which will have an impact on the capital strategy. Current operating leases where costs are charged to revenue will have to be brought onto the balance sheet as a right of use asset. And as a result of the coronavirus pandemic, the implementation of this change has been delayed to 2022-23, and so the impact of these changes is still under review, and I'll obviously bring that back to Council in due course. I touched earlier on borrowing for commercial activities. This is a hugely important change to the strategy and relates to the changes to the lending terms for commercial activities. And as a condition of borrowing from the PWLB, our main source of borrowing, I've got to confirm that there's no intention for investment assets to buy investment assets purely for yield. And I've mentioned it twice already, and I just want to dwell on it a little bit because it really is quite fundamental. If we were to purchase or to set out a capital scheme that was purely for yield, then we would be prevented from borrowing, both myself and the Council, for any capital programme. So that would jeopardise our whole capital programme if we were to embark on an activity that was purely for yield. And so as each capital project comes before you, that will be one of the tests that we will have to satisfy. And so you'll be hearing quite a lot more about that in the future. And then lastly, some recommendations from internal audit. Following an internal audit review of capital expenditure and feasibility studies, which was raised at Council and taken through the Audit and Governance Committee. The strategy has been strengthened by requiring a detailed feasibility assessment of capital projects. That's at section 5, and the need for post-project evaluation to learn from best practice, and that's set out in section 5.3. So that was all I wanted to say, Mr. Mayor, on the two strategies this afternoon. I'll take you to the recommendations at 9.1.
Thank you, Jill. Once again, congratulations on how you expressed that, and we all understand it, hopefully. So thank you very much for everything you've done this afternoon. It really is appreciated. Can I have a mover, please?
Move.
Okay,
Move.
second.
Second.
Thank you. I have two councillors indicating wishing to speak. First of all, Councillor Lynn Waters, please.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and thank you again to Jill and her team for pulling together this report. The question I have is it's regarding the special purpose vehicle the proposal on page 227 of our pack, table 12, to increase the lending to third parties or to loans of external companies up to 2 million. So I've got one question for Jill and also one question to the cabinet member for communities. So if I do the first one to Jill, if that's okay, Mr. Mayor,
Yes.
how do we protect ourselves from borrowing up to £2 million and then lending the £2 million to an SPV? From the cabinet papers that were submitted in January, it looks as if the proposed repayment on the SPV is over 40 years and at an interest rate of 2.6%, while this Treasury document shows that our average rate is 4.7%. Will this borrowing and then lending to an SPV impact on our ability to borrow and possibly fund our Band B schools?
Thank you, Councillor. Jill?
Okay, thank you, Mr. Mayor, and thank you, Councillor Walters, for the question. It is something that we haven't done. We haven't had an SPV in Bridgend Council previously. Just to give you some assurance, the SPV will have representation from the council and will be a company that is very closely linked to the council. So we will have representation, we will have some element of control over that investment, and obviously we will have in place protections against the money not being reinvested back into the council. Obviously, you cannot mitigate against all risks. There will be an element of risk, as there is with any loan, but I know that colleagues in communities are putting in place as much as possible in the way of mitigation to make sure that that risk is minimised.
Thank you, Jill. Councillor Walters, would you like to put your next point to Councillor Young?
Thank you very much.
I think Councillor Walters has actually.
No, I haven't. No, I haven't put the question to you yet, Councillor Young. And thank you, Jill, for that response.
Sorry.
The question I've got to yourself, Councillor Young, is how much is the SPV going to cost us to run? And where are we going to find the expertise to actually run an energy company? As it's incredibly a cutthroat business, lots of expertise, and the thought that Bridgend has staff who are able to do that, it's pushing it in my mind. So thank you.
Yes, I think you're absolutely right. I think on this basis, because it's such a detailed question, I'm going to have to defer to Janine on this, to be perfectly honest with you. I can see that she wants to come in. Suffice it to say that this is not a new concept. It's probably new for Bridgend, but other local authorities have formed SPVs for various things. It's simply an arm's length company to give us the ability to provide a service to the people of Bridgend that I think is sorely needed, and it's part of our 2030 agenda. So it is linked in to our carbon reduction strategy. But I'll call on Janine to give you the in-depth, detailed answer that I think your question deserves.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Is it okay to come in? Yes, thank you, Councillor Walters. For the purposes of the recording, I'm Janine Nightingale, the Corporate Director for Communities. Councillor Walters, we are bringing a detailed report on the SPV to Cabinet in on the 9th of March, so we'll have the detail in there. But just if I may, just explain a little bit of background here. The Bridgend District Heat Network is part of our decarbonisation strategy for Bridgend for 2030, and it's been funded jointly by the County Council and by HNIP, which is central government. They're giving us over £1 million to start this heat network phase 1 to provide heat and power from the Bridgend Life Centre using excess heat from the swimming pool to generate heat for decarbonisation purposes, really. So what it is, it's an arrangement whereby we have to invest as a county, as a council, as well as central government. Now, one of the recommendations of HNIP is that we have to set up a special purpose vehicle to run this heat network, and that SPV will be 100% owned by Bridgend Council. So it'll be we will be the shareholders for that company. It'll be private. We will have board of directors which will run the company, and that will be usually from the council itself, but we will get some external expertise onto that panel, and that will be explained in further detail in that cabinet report that's coming forward in March. But just to explain a little bit of where we're going, we've had some experts advise us on the setup of this SPV called Brodie's. Brodie's are based in Scotland, and they've set up the special purpose vehicles for all councils in Scotland who have district heat networks, and they advise on that. And we've also been working with a couple of other companies, Asteros and ACOM, who are our project managers. Now, the advice that we're getting from those three is that what we should seek is what's called a DBOM contractor. It's a contractor when we go to the market that will design the system, will build the system, will operate the system and maintain it for us. So we will have experts delivering this heat network for us. They will work for the SPV, and the SPV will be owned by Bridgend Council. So just to explain, so whilst we don't have expertise in this area, they will work on this for us and run it for us. Of course, there's lots and lots of articles that will go into the SPV that will afford us protection, and rightly so. And one of the things that Brodie's, our legal consultants, are suggesting is that we could set up the SPV with just 3 people from the county council to begin with, but that we could opt onto that board of directors, people who have experience in the energy sector, and people who are outside the council, to offer their expertise and help us steer this company going forward. Again, once again, just to make clear, this is not about creating profit. This is about creating a sustainable decarbonisation district heat network for Bridgend. And hopefully, if we get success in phase 1, which is very much our ambition, we can move that district heat out into phases 2 and 3 and really get some momentum behind it. It's innovative as part of our 2030 decarbonisation strategy. Of course, it doesn't come without risk. There's risk in all these areas, but hopefully, with the advice that we've been given from Brodie's, the advice from ACOM and Asteros, we should be able to mitigate that and hopefully have some success moving forward. And just to come back onto the point about a 40-year loan, apparently it's very normal in the world of district heats to have loans from between 30 to 50 years in other schemes because of the finances involved and the return on investment. We've modelled our scheme currently over 40 years, but when we come back from the market, after we do a tender exercise, we may be able to reduce that loan term depending on the offer that comes forward. So more about that anon, really, because what the process is, if we get acceptance from on the SPV on the 9th of March of the Cabinet Report and acceptance of the borrowing on the 10th of March at Council, the next step is to go to tender to see who's interested in putting this system in, and then what will happen is we will critique that business case and then come back for cabinet approval to proceed. So I suppose where we are currently is just asking for permission to go out to the market and set up this SPV. There's going to be a whole detailed analysis the other end to check that it is value for money and it is the right option before we commit to that investment. So I hope that's just a little bit more background, really. There's an awful lot of work gone into it, but hopefully the Cabinet report in March should be able to give you some more information.
Thank you, Janine. Thank you, Councillor Waters. Next, I have Councillor Voisey, please.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I was going to ask some similar questions, but basically, we haven't had a great track record in any of the energy projects we've been involved in. And I think with the warm homes and the groundwater, where we seem to spend a lot of money, and the net result hasn't been particularly good. I just want reassurances that this isn't just going to be another white elephant that costs the council taxpayer. And the 40 years, I'm assuming that we know that the Life Centre has got a 40-year life left in it. I just wondered, I just don't seem to have a huge degree of confidence in this project, and would like to see more information rather than just sign it off now. It's a couple of lines in a budget programme. I do think that perhaps we ought to take this out and study it in more detail before we approve it. With the report coming in March, is it not perhaps a little bit, the cart before the horse now in this process? And I feel very uncomfortable and would even go as far to ask that this be taken out of this report now.
Thank you, Councillor. Janine, do you wish to respond? I know Jill has indicated as well, but you were first.
Yes, please, if I may. Just to make it clear to Councillor Voisey that a report on the district heat project, a very detailed report, was approved by Cabinet in January. That went through the cycle and was approved. The report in March is about the special purpose vehicle, which is what needs to be established. One thing that I also need to point out really is the HNIP funding, the £1 million towards this scheme, needs to be drawn down by the 20th of March this year, or we need to demonstrate that we've made progress to draw down that money. So what we do need, I'm afraid, is to make some progress on this. But just to assure Councillor Voisey, at this point, what we have got permission to do is to go out to the market to look for the interest in designing, building, operating and maintaining this system. We have not committed any monies or any expenditure yet. That will be subject to another cabinet process and another approval. This is just to go forward with these schemes. And these elsewhere in the country have been very, very successful. And if I may, Mr. Mayor, to come back to the point on ground heat and other uses that we are exploring, they are demonstrators currently demonstrating the new innovative technology, and really we haven't implemented those fully yet to be able to judge whether they're successful or not. That's something we're still doing. And again, an important part of new innovation is to test and to demonstrate their robustness. So we would like to come back to you and explain how well they've done in the future, but those are still demonstrators. Thank you.
Thank you, Janine. Jill, do you want to come in?
Yes, please, if I could, Mr. Mayor. I just want to remind Council, I'm sure Council are aware of it, that these papers before you today are setting the capital strategy and the Treasury management strategy for the next years, for next year. And all that is contained within these papers is an ability to lend. The opportunity to discuss whether that happens has not yet happened, and will, as Janine says, come back in full detail before Cabinet and March Council to be put into the capital programme. So I wouldn't want our whole capital and treasury management strategy to be diverted on something that hasn't yet happened, and these aren't about the heat strategies.
Okay, thank you, Joe. Matthew, Councillor Voisey, did you want to come back in before I go on to others, please?
Yeah, I just wanted to thank the officers. Their answers are very clear, and I have full confidence that everything is above board, and that it's going to be properly scrutinised. So I just like to thank them and leave it there. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. I have next Councillor Julia Williams.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I was actually going to try not to speak today, but I'm afraid I've got to on this. Something that Janine said about advisors and or advisors, she called them, consultants again. I've got a bee in my bonnet about the amount of money that's being spent on said consultants. And I'm just wondering if Janine can tell me how much all this is costing. I think although the budget has gone through today, all of us, I'm sure that my friends in the Labour group as well, they don't want to put up council tax. We know this, but unfortunately, council tax has gone up, and some of my constituents in Hendra can barely afford to feed their children, let alone pay any more council tax. And then we're talking about spending thousands of pounds on advisors and consultants about some heat project. And quite honestly, the heat projects that we've done in the past haven't been exactly successful, have they? And these are things that are for the future. Let's get this year over with first. We're just coming out of one of the worst things that have happened in my lifetime. And hopefully it won't be as bad as this in another 100 years. But shouldn't we be looking at what we're doing today and not worried about what we're doing tomorrow? Just now, for now, I know we have to look ahead, but to spend thousands of pounds on something like this, when some people cannot afford to put food in front of their children, this is why I voted against.
Thank you, Councillor Williams. Janine, I know you've indicated to come back, please.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just to be clear, if I may, is that all of the development on all of the energy projects that we've taken place has been funded by central government. It hasn't come out of council funds. All of the work so far has been funded by HNIP for the development of this heat network. They suggested that we use Brody's, and these are the companies that we've been directed to use by central government, and they have paid for the development of this. Because I think if they hadn't, to be honest, Councillor, we probably couldn't have developed up these schemes, and central government understand that. So the heat network has been paid for, all the development in its entirety, by the HNIP grant funding, and will continue to until we get to a position where we are tendering. And the same must be said as well for the other schemes that we're exploring in other areas of the borough, for ground source and some of the air source heat pumps have been funded once again by WEFO, which is through the Welsh Government. So this piece of work it isn't from council funds, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Janine. Thank you, Councillor Williams. I have next Councillor.
Excuse me, Mr. Mayor, can I come back, please?
Yes, certainly.
Thank you. Okay, Janine, the money isn't coming from council funds, but this is exactly my point. We call ourselves, or some of us do, one council, and as far as I'm concerned, we are not. Like, we're not one country, Wales, we're not one country, the UK. Money is going on projects which, in my opinion, are a complete waste of money, while other projects are underfunded. And that's exactly, in my opinion, what is happening in our council. Just because the money comes from somewhere else, it doesn't, in my opinion, doesn't make it right. I mean, I tried to explain to somebody when this week is a silly analogy, I know, but where I worked, we were allowed 2 pairs of navy trousers a year. And just because there was money left over at the end of the year, we could buy ourselves 2 more pairs of navy trousers, whether we wanted them or not. Instead of that money for the navy trousers going into the pot to help patients. This is my point. If we should be one council, and then if there's money over in one department, it goes into another. It's the same in the country. Instead of blinking, wasting all this money, I'm just exasperated by it.
Thank you,
Mr.
Councillor.
Mayor, would you like me to come back on that comment?
Yes, please, but I can see that Mark Shepherd has also indicated, but would you like to come back first?
Yes, of course. This is part of UK government's climate emergency agenda, the work that we're doing with the district heat network. And of course, Welsh Government have declared their climate emergency and have asked all of public sector to be net carbon zero by 2030. And as part of that strategy, we need to look in the area of energy. And this is part of that British strategy for emergency, really. So as part of that strategy, we're working with the city region and the funding has come forward for us to move to more decarbonisation of our energy. And that's why we're working on this scheme for the district heat and other schemes for decarbonisation and ultra low emission vehicles, because it's being driven by the climate emergency and funded in that way. And I just hope that would provide a more strategic narrative behind the work that we're doing now. It's to ensure that we can decarbonise it in the future. Thank you.
Thank you.
Mayor, can I crave your indulgence as Cabinet Member and ask to join this debate, please?
Yes, I know the Chief Exec has also indicated. Can I take the Chief Exec first, please?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and thank you, Councillor Young.
I'll come back to Councillor Young after that.
I won't make a long contribution because in part Janine has answered, but I did want to respond to Councillor Julia Williams and firstly to say, of course, that I think every officer and probably every member would have some sympathy with the sentiments that Councillor Williams is putting. Unfortunately, though, public sector funding is not quite joined up in the way that Councillor Williams has described, and so the reality is that if we chose not to pursue, for example, that scheme or an energy scheme, unfortunately it doesn't help her constituents in her ward because it would simply mean that some other authority would grab that money instead. So I suppose what I'm saying is it's a balance always between pursuing those elements of external funding that do meet our agenda and do meet our corporate plan, and I think it's been explained this one really very clearly does in terms of our 2030 agenda, and whether we like it or not, we are obliged to look to the future from the Wellbeing of Future Generations Act. It's not